Okay, the 5 things I think you need to learn and or do to take your photography to the next level. Number 1 is get in manual mode. Stop being in the presets, you know, landscape, portrait, action. Get out of there. Once you're in manual mode and you start to learn the next 4 things, that is when you really can learn how to manipulate a photo to make it come out the way that you want. Okay, so with shutter speed, you can stop motion or show motion. So what I'm gonna do is, I have my A7 III here, and we're at a waterfall. I'm gonna take some photos of the waterfall at different shutter speeds so you can see how it affects the water that is falling. Okay, you can see our waterfall right here. So starting off, I'm going to rest my camera on this ledge right here. I'm going to start shooting at ISO 640. My aperture is at f2.8, and my first shutter speed I'm going to use is 1/80. Now I'm going to bump my shutter speed up to shutter speed up to 200. And now we're going to bump the shutter speed up to 2500. Now, since the shutter speed is so high, I do have to adjust my ISO so that the photo is somewhat exposed. There we go. Okay, so now that we've talked about shutter speed and how shutter speed can show motion or stop motion, we're going to talk about ISO. Okay, so now that we're moving on to ISO, ISO is your camera's sensitivity to light, whether it has sunglasses on or not. I'm going to focus right here. There's a little carve mark on this railing. We're going to start our first photo. Shutter speed 1/160, aperture f2.8, and ISO 125. Take a shot. Now we're going to bump the ISO up to 250. And now we're going to bump the ISO up to 500. And then we'll bump the ISO up to 1000. Okay, now we're going to talk about aperture. Aperture is your focal range. So how narrow or how wide your focus spot is. So what I'm going to do is, there's some gold locks down here. I'm going to focus on these gold locks, and I'm going to change my aperture so that you can see how much of that comes in focus. Okay, so right now my aperture is at 2.8. Now I'm going to change my aperture to f5.6. And then finally, I'm going to change my aperture to f11. Now, one thing you'll notice is as you're changing your aperture and your shutter speed, all your other settings are affected as well. Okay, you'll notice as you're changing your shutter speed, your aperture, and your ISO, the exposure of your picture changes. That's normal. What you're doing is if you're slowing down your shutter speed, more light is coming in. If you speed up your shutter speed, less light is coming in. So the eyeball is either open longer or open shorter. Now, if you're changing your aperture and you're focusing on something really, really small, like at an f, 1.8, 2.8, a lot of light is going to that one focus point. If you increase your aperture, like f11, you want to get all of the trees or all of this waterfall in focus. Your focus point's bigger, so you need more light to come into that. And since your focus point is bigger, you're actually getting less light over the whole entire photo. And then your ISO, in that situation, you would increase your ISO to make your camera more sensitive to light. So if your ISO goes up, it's going to see more light. So it's basically a triangle, and you're always kind of smashing one side and blowing out the others to find the perfect spot. Now, a cool trick with that is once you start using ND filters, neutral density filters, you can get them in different stops, or you can get them that are variable. So what I did is I took a photo of the waterfall and I used a really, really, really slow shutter speed and a really, really, really high aperture so that a lot of it is in focus. And to do that, I had to have my ISO turned up so the photo was completely blown out. But if you put on a neutral density filter, that is like wearing sunglasses or 2 or 3 sets of sunglasses. And it can really give you some cool photos. So once you start playing with your shutter speed, your ISO, and your aperture, and understanding how they affect the photos, letting more light in, letting less light in, making your focus spot bigger or smaller, or the more things in focus or less things in focus, and then slowing down the motion or freezing motion in your photos or showing motion blur in your photos, and you want to get a different outcome because you want, maybe to show a real long motion blur trail on something, or you want to show like leaves moving in the wind. That is when you can start using neutral density filters to take your photography to a complete next level. Okay, so you can see that I have this pathway right here. I'm going to take some photos of the pathway, but I'm going to do it with the rule of thirds and kind of move everything around to see how it looks. So if we stand just straight on, I'm looking directly at the center of the pathway, and this is a central focused, still using the rule of thirds. So I have the pathway as centered as possible, and that is still using the rule of thirds, but I'm going to show you different ways to do that with the rule of thirds as well. So now I'm going to go a little bit lower, and we're going to have the pathway slightly off-centered. There we go. So I basically shot that one where it's about midway with more of a left-centered rule of third. And even when doing this, you can see that you have your grid points. You can kind of put the top of the railing in there and really change the photo as well. So now I'm going to shoot it with more of a right upper focus. And now what I'm trying to do is, using the rule of thirds, I am using my grid lines, and I put this point on one of the cross spots for the rule of thirds, just to kind of spice the photo up a little bit more. We'll take some more photos. I'll move over to this tree knot over here. So there's a tree knot over here. I'm going to use that to try to get some better rule of third photos. once you understand the rule of thirds and start seeing different angles, you can really change how something looks in a photo. Okay, so I took a couple shots there. I'm not trying to make these like, you know, magazine cover prints. I just want to show you how using the rule of thirds can really change how an object looks.